In between your upper arm and your lateral chest wall, a space is present, and this space is called the axilla. Externally, at the region of axilla, armpit is present, and at the level of armpit, a fossa is present. Since this fossa is present at the region where axilla is present, it is called the axillary fossa. In front of the axillary fossa, a fold of skin is present, which is called the anterior axillary fold. And a line passing through the anterior axillary fold is called the anterior axillary line. Posterior to axillary fossa, a fold of skin is present, which is called the posterior axillary fold. And a line passing through the posterior axillary fold is called the posterior axillary line. A line passes through the middle of the axillary fossa, which is called the mid-axillary line. So there are three major lines that you need to know. One that is present in front of the axillary fossa, which is the anterior axillary line. One that is present behind the axillary fossa, which is the posterior axillary line. And one that passes through the middle of the axillary fossa, which is called the mid-axillary line. Internally, axilla is present in the form of a pyramidal space, and this pyramidal space is enclosed from all sides. It contains an apex, a base, and 4 walls in total. So there's your pyramidal space. This pyramidal space contains an apex, a base, and 4 walls in total, enclosing the whole space. Let me show the same thing in the diagram. So this right here is the axilla, which is present in the form of a pyramidal space right behind the level of armpit. So here's the apex, and here's the base of the axilla. If you look closely, you'll see that the axilla is present slightly obliquely. Since the space is present obliquely, the apex is also directed slightly medially. So the direction of apex is upwards and medially. All right. Similarly, there's your base at the bottom, which is directed downwards. Enclosing the whole thing are 4 walls. There's your anterior wall, there's your posterior wall, there's your medial wall, and then there's your lateral wall. In this particular video, you are going to learn about each of these boundaries of axilla in detail. So first up, we have the apex. There are few things that you need to know about apex. Number 1, apex is present at the base of the neck. At the base of the neck. So here's the neck. This is the base of the neck. At the level of the base of the neck, there's your clavicle. And right behind the clavicle, there's the apex of axilla. So apex is present at the base of the neck. Second, apex is directed medially and upwards. So here's the apex. It is directed medially and upwards. Third and important point about apex is that it is also called cervico-axillary canal. The reason being, it acts as a canal. Apex acts as a canal between the cervical region, which is the neck region, and the axilla. For various structures such as axillary blood vessels, your cords of brachial plexus, lymphatics, from the neck region To pass into the axilla, it has to go through apex. So apex acts as a canal for structures from the neck region to pass into the axilla. That's why it's called the cervicoaxillary canal. Now let's look at the boundaries of apex. Apex is almost triangular in structure, not exactly triangular, almost triangular. The reason being it is compressed laterally and broader medially. So it is broad medially, and as we move laterally, it becomes compressed and takes an almost triangular structure. So as for the boundaries, we need to know three of them: the anterior boundary of apex, the medial boundary of apex, and the posterior boundary of apex. As you can see in this picture, anteriorly, apex is bounded by the posterior surface of clavicle. Medially, it is bounded by the lateral border of the first rib. And posteriorly, it is bounded by the superior border of scapula along with the medial surface of coracoid process of scapula. Let me show you the same thing by drawing the diagram itself. Okay, so at the base of the neck, there's your apex. In front of the apex, there's clavicle. So here's the clavicle. Oh, that's messed up. So here's the clavicle. This is the medial portion of the clavicle, and this is the lateral portion of the clavicle. Behind the clavicle is the posterior surface of the clavicle, and the posterior surface of the clavicle forms the anterior border of axilla. Medially, there's the first rib. This is the lateral border of the first rib, and it forms the medial boundary of axilla. Posteriorly, there's your scapula. Here's the scapula, along with the coracoid process. There's the coracoid process as well. Okay, the superior border of the scapula along with the medial surface of coracoid process of scapula forms the posterior border of axilla. So the space within these three boundaries contains the axilla. Okay, one last revision for the apex of axilla. Number one, apex is present at the base of the neck. Number two, apex is directed medially and upward. Number three, apex is also called cervicoaxillary canal. And number four, there are three boundaries of apex: anterior, medial, and posterior. The anterior boundary is formed by the posterior border of clavicle. The medial boundary is formed by the lateral border of first rib, and the posterior boundary is formed by the superior border of clavicle along with the medial surface of, wait, did I just write clavicle? Sorry, border of scapula along with the medial surface of coracoid process. Next up, we have base. Base of the axilla is present at the bottom of the axilla, and it is directed downwards. It is directed downwards. Base of the axilla is present at the armpit region, or at the region of axilla just behind the axillary fossa. The base is bounded anteriorly by the anterior axillary fold. So anteriorly by anterior axillary fold. It is bounded posteriorly by the posterior axillary fold. Posteriorly by the posterior axillary fold. Axillary fold. And medially by the lateral chest wall. Medially by lateral chest wall. Here's the base, This is the anterior to the base and it contains the anterior axillary fold. This is the posterior to the base and it contains the posterior axillary fold. And this is medial to the base and it is formed of the lateral chest wall. The base overall is formed of skin and axillary fascia, which is present right behind the skin. Now that we are done with apex and base of the axilla, all that remains are the four walls of axilla: the anterior wall, the posterior wall, the medial wall, and the lateral wall. Let's look at each of them one by one. So let's look at the anterior and the posterior wall of the axilla. In order to study the anterior and the posterior wall, what I'm going to do is take the longitudinal section of axilla. So we have the axilla. Let's take the longitudinal section like this. After taking the longitudinal section, I'm going to show the axilla from the side. So first take a longitudinal section, then rotate it so that you are able to look at the side view of the axilla. So here's the thing. What did you expect forming the anterior wall of the axilla? Obviously, what is present at the front of the chest, right? And what's present at the front of the chest? It's the pectoral region. So it's the pectoral region that also forms the anterior wall of the axilla. See right here. Axilla is present at this region till the clavicle, right? It's obliquely present at this region. If you take a longitudinal section of the axilla, just like this, and look at it from the side, what are you going to find at the front? You are obviously going to find the pectoral region. So it's the pectoral region that forms the anterior wall of the axilla. And if you don't know what pectoral region is composed of or what are the various layers of pectoral region, I already have a video uploaded on that. So check it out before looking at this. Okay, so what is the anterior wall composed of? Anterior wall of axilla. So after taking a longitudinal section of the axilla, we are going to look at it from the side. From side, let's say this is the anterior view. So in the front or at this region, what are you going to find? You are going to find the pectoral region, the various layers of pectoral region. The outermost layer of pectoral region is obviously the skin. Right behind the skin is present the superficial fascia. At the top of the axilla, right in front of the apex, anterior to the apex, is present the clavicle. The clavicle is attached with the pectoralis major muscle. Here's the pectoralis major muscle. The pectoralis major muscle is covered by the pectoralis fascia, which is also called the deep fascia, which extends to form the axillary fascia. The muscle that is present right below the clavicle is the subclavius muscle. Another muscle present inferiorly behind the pectoralis major muscle is the pectoralis minor muscle. Covering the pectoralis minor muscle from both sides and subclavius muscle from both sides is the clavipectoral fascia. The clavipectoral fascia extends to form the suspensory ligament, which is connected with the dome of axillary fascia. Okay, let me level the whole thing. So outermost, you have the skin. Right behind the skin, you have the superficial fascia. Right behind the superficial fascia is the deep fascia. The deep fascia is found covering the pectoralis major muscle. Behind the pectoralis major muscle is the subclavius muscle. Below subclavius muscle is the pectoralis minor muscle. Covering both subclavius muscle and pectoralis minor muscle from both sides is the clavipectoral fascia. Which extends to form the suspensory ligament. And the suspensory ligament extends and connects with the dome of axillary fascia. So what forms the anterior wall of axilla? You don't need to mention all of them. All you need to mention are: number 1, the pectoralis major muscle. Number 2, the subclavius muscle. Number 3, pectoralis minor muscle. And number 4, the clavipectoral fascia, which is covering the pectoralis minor as well as the subclavius muscle. The posterior wall of axilla is composed of the muscles that are present at the back of the axilla. And these are the subscapularis muscle, teres major muscle, and latissimus dorsi muscle. Teres major muscle actually originates from the back of the scapula. However, it kind of twists and then inserts in front of the humerus. As you can see in this diagram, this is the posterior view or the back view. Teres major originates from the back of the scapula. It originates from the dorsal surface of scapula. However, it proceeds to insert in front of the humerus, and that is why teres major forms the posterior wall of axilla. If you were to take a longitudinal section of this wall, like the section that I took in the beginning, you would see these 3 muscles forming the posterior wall. So at the top, there would be subscapularis muscle. This is the subscapularis muscle. By the way, this is the posterior view. You see the subscapularis muscle. Below subscapularis muscle, teres major muscle, and below teres major, latissimus dorsi muscle. All 3 muscles covered inside a fascia, just like this. What I have here is the sagittal section. So here's the human to be displayed, and then this human is caught along this line, which is the longitudinal section, which is also called the sagittal section. Then we are looking at it from the side, S-I-D-E side. Here's the axilla. This is the anterior wall of the axilla, and this is the posterior wall of the axilla. As you can see, the anterior wall is bound by the pectoralis major muscle, subclavius muscle, and pectoralis minor muscle, as well as the clavipectoral fascia. And the posterior wall is bound by the subscapularis muscle, teres major muscle, and latissimus dorsi muscle. This right here is the medial wall of axilla. And as you can see in the diagram, the medial wall of axilla is formed of, number 1, the upper part of serratus anterior muscle, and number 2, first 4 ribs along with their intercostal muscles. So you have rib number 1, 2, 3, 4, along with the first intercostal muscles, second intercostal muscles, and third intercostal muscles. The lateral wall of the axilla is highly compressed and extremely thin The reason being the anterior wall and the posterior wall of the axilla almost converge. This right here represented in red is the lateral wall, the anterior wall, and the one present behind the posterior wall. They almost converge with one another as they move laterally, forming an extremely thin lateral wall of the axilla. The lateral wall of the axilla is bounded by following structures. Number one, the sulcus that is present in between the tubercles of the humerus, called the intertubercular sulcus. Both the long head and the short head of biceps brachii, as well as the coracobrachialis muscle. It's not possible for us to draw individual diagram for all of the four walls of axilla in exam because the time is quite limited. So what I'm going to draw right now is the diagram representing all four walls at once. And this is the one that you have to draw in exam. For that, what I'm going to do is take a section of the axilla like this. So this is the section that I'm going to take, and then look at this section from top. This is going to be my point of view. Upon doing that, this is what I'll get. But before showing what I'll get, let me demarcate the sides. This is going to be the lateral side, this the medial side, this the anterior side, and this the posterior side. And obviously the respective sides are going to have the respective walls of axilla. So you are going to see the axilla, the caught part of the axilla from top having its lateral wall on this side, medial wall on this side, anterior wall on this side, and posterior wall on this side. Basically, it's going to be like this. So the medial wall is going to be here, anterior wall is going to be here, lateral wall is going to be here, and the posterior wall is going to be here. From all the knowledge that you have gained till now, what is present medially? If you look at it from the top, what's present medially? The rib. So we have the rib which is present medially. Posteriorly, the bone that is present is scapula. And laterally, the bone that is present is the top part of humerus. Now, the anterior wall contains muscles. What are those muscles? The pectoralis major muscle that is present in the front, the pectoralis major muscle. Right behind the pectoralis major muscle is the pectoralis minor muscle. Posteriorly, the muscles present are the subscapularis muscle, the teres major muscle, and the latissimus dorsi muscle. Medially, the muscles present are serratus anterior muscle. The intercostal muscles are also present, but they are not visible when you take this view of the axilla. And finally, laterally, the muscles present are the long head of biceps brachii, the short head of biceps brachii, and coracobrachialis. I'm going to level the whole thing. This is going to be the final revision of the walls of axilla. So listen carefully. Medially, there's your rib. And the muscle present medially is the serratus anterior muscle. You also have intercostal muscles which are not visible from this view. Anteriorly, you have pectoralis major muscle, pectoralis major muscle, and pectoralis minor muscle. There is also subclavius muscle which is present below the clavicle, which is also not visible here. Posteriorly, there's subscapularis muscle, teres major muscle, and finally laterally you have the long head of biceps brachii, the short head of biceps brachii, as well as coracobrachialis. But hold on, the diagram is yet not complete. These are the boundaries of axilla. These are the walls of axilla. But what you also need to know are the contents of axilla. What are the structures that are present within this pyramidal space? The axilla contains the following structures. It contains the axillary artery and its branches, the axillary vein and its branches. The axillary artery is actually surrounded by the cords of brachial plexus. What is brachial plexus? It will have a new video of its own soon enough. So the cords are the medial cord, the lateral cord, and the posterior cord. The medial cord gives rise to the medial pectoral nerve. The lateral cord gives rise to the lateral pectoral nerve. Both of them supplies to the pectoralis muscles. The posterior cord gives rise to subscapularis nerve, which is supplied to subscapularis muscle. Along with that, you can also find the long thoracic nerve, which is supplied to serratus anterior muscle. The content or the structures of axilla is present within the axillary sheath. There are axillary lymph nodes present in groups at various places. So these are the contents of axilla: the axillary artery and its branches, the axillary vein and its branches, the cords of brachial plexus surrounding the axillary artery, the nerves supplying to pectoralis major and minor muscle, the nerve supplying to subscapularis muscle, long thoracic nerve supplying to serratus anterior muscle, the axillary sheath covering the structures within the axilla, as well as groups of axillary lymph nodes present at various places. And boom, we are done with axilla, and I hope you enjoyed this lecture.